Representative Palumbo. Representative Gibbons-Prunty.
Here in the room.
Representative Raymond.
I'm here.
Representative Reed.
Here in the room.
Representative Riley. Here in the room. Representative Santoro.
Here in the room.
Representative Tipton.
Present in the room.
Representative Wilner.
Present remotely.
Thank you. Chairman Petrie.
Present in the room.
Thank. Very good. So the co-chair and I were discussing there are some paper copies of the committee substitute that are going to be distributed to the Senate members of the committee. I believe you're going to speak to the committee substitute, correct, Representative McCoy? For everyone's aggrandizement, and so we can move through this expeditiously, I know these are all topics that generate a lot of emotion on both sides. My request for all members of the committee would be that we limit our inquiries to inquiries of the presenter, not necessarily extended speeches, because we could certainly greatly exceed our hour-and-a-half time limit. I think that we will have opportunities for speeches as we move forward, but I think today we're dealing with a lot of technical mechanisms. So with that, I will turn it over to Co-Chair Petrie.
And just one announcement to follow up with Co-Chair McDaniel. The House members received the sub by electronic delivery last Friday. I think paper copies are being prepared for everyone just in case. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Representative McCoy, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, gentlemen, and ladies and gentlemen of the committee. Thanks for taking time out of your busy Wednesday to talk with me. This is a discussion only, and obviously it's a different meeting. We're doing a joint discussion because we wanted to get our peers in the Senate kind of up to speed as well. You know, one thing we've all seen with COVID and the shutdown of schools is the clamor from our constituents for some sort of school choice. And school choice has a lot of meanings to a lot of different people. Some of it's scary, some of it's not. And I'm going to just point out that the bills we're discussing today, they've been out for a long time. I am not the person that came up with any of these ideas. Quite frankly, these used to be Democrat bills years ago, and for some reason now they're not, but maybe we can get everybody back on the same page. These bills have also been filed for a while. I've combined them into a committee sub that the Senate's just now getting, the House you've had it, but there's really nothing new in there that wasn't in some of the other bills, other than some things that I think you'll find are positive changes. And really for my involvement, this started last year when Leader Carney was not able to take and finish his work. This is something that he's been doing in the House for a long time. We picked up that bill, and when I got involved with it, it was called scholarship tax credits at the time, and I sat down with everybody. I had Superintendents Association come in and meet with me. I had any school district that wanted to, and quite frankly, there were a lot of really good changes to the bill, and I incorporated them. So it's had a lot of iterations as it's gone through. So let me just kind of get to the nuts and bolts. Here's what we've got. The committee sub takes two different bills and puts them together, and they're both school choice. I want to talk about what I'm going to call School Without Borders first. The School Without Borders portion simply says that a school district shall adopt a policy that deals with taking non-resident students. That is, students that don't live within the borders of that school district. It doesn't say they have to accept students. In fact, it expressly says that they've got capacity issues. They can acknowledge that. So all it's doing is asking them to adopt a policy to deal with it. The second thing it does is if a non-resident student comes into your district, you get to include them in your ADA. That's the average daily attendance. What that is the state's portion of the SEEK formula. So money follows the child to some extent. Now, the kind of thing about the bill is we don't have all of it figured out, especially with respect to how we're going to make the money go. So what I've asked in this bill is I've asked the Kentucky Department of Education to get me their thoughts on how they see the funding mechanisms working. In addition, and I know we all hate these, but we've put a task force in there to get some senators, to get some reps, to get some superintendents, to get some other school personnel, everybody involved to look at how can we make the money follow the student. Because without that, we've got a problem. And I'll use my county. I'm in Nelson County. We've got the bourbon warehouses. Our local taxes are insane. We tax a lot of the bourbon industry. And so our portion of the SEEK formula is actually pretty low. So a kid from Nelson County doesn't come with a lot of state money. Whereas a kid, let's say Owsley County, my understanding is their tax base is not as high. So they get a much larger portion of state SEEK dollars. So schools might want Owsley County kids. They may not want Nelson County kids. And that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to create, an open playing field, so to speak. Some concerns that people brought to me about this bill, especially my friends in Eastern Kentucky, one was that, well, this is just a recruiting thing. I want to be very clear. I really don't care about the sports. I'm about educating kids. So I put in this bill, if you transfer, you simply cannot play sports for 1 year. And yep, that's unfair. Yep, that's pretty bad. But I don't care because you're moving not because you want to be on a better team. You're moving because you want a better education. So that's in there. The other thing we've done in this part is we have delayed the implementation till the July 2022 school year. That means we've got a whole nother legislative session to be back here. And what we'll have when we get back here is we'll have the KDE's report, and there's another agency that I'm going to get it wrong, OEA. They're doing a report. We'll have the task force report. So this body will have a lot more information to figure out some of the more technical funding issues. And if we need to make a change, we've got all next session, the long session, 60 days, we can make it before this actually starts taking effect. So that's part one. Now, that was a Senate bill, and I'm sorry, my senator friends, I don't remember the number, but the Senate Education Committee had it all ready for a discussion. So there's really nothing new in that bill other than the task force part. I added that to your Senate bill. Otherwise, it's the exact same language. Part two, education opportunity accounts. Education opportunity accounts work with two steps, and they're very separate steps. So let me talk about step one. Step one is how do we get the money? What happens is there might be an individual or a business out there that wants to donate to one of these funds. And in doing so, they're going to get a tax credit. But before they can do that, they have to apply to the Department of Revenue and get permission to do it. And they have to show where the fund's coming from, how many years it's going to be, talk about whether they're given stocks or given money, all kinds of regs there. So once that happens, that person or that business gets a tax credit. That's part one, but there's some confusion out there because I hear a lot of people say, oh, this is just a way for people to get a tax credit for making tuition payments. That is simply not true. That's nowhere in this bill, never has been in this bill. So put part one aside for a second. Now we've got the money, and the money can only be up to $25 million. It doesn't grow. $25 million is the cap, and we've also reduced a different tax credit elsewhere in the budgeting process so that this is a wash to the state. So now we've got the money. So now let's talk about part two. In part two, anyone who is eligible is allowed to apply to one of these account granting organizations to get a grant. And the grants can cover a lot of things. And it's in the committee sub on page 15. And initially, number one was the grant could have gone for tuition at a public or private school. We took out private school tuition. And I want to be very clear. I personally hate that. I think this bill should have it in there. But quite frankly, enough people complained that this was just a way to fund private schools. And I want to be clear again. I'm about educating the kids. So if we've got to just do it for public, then let's do it for the public. At least it's something, and something is better than nothing, and nothing is what we were going to get. So right now, private tuition is out of this bill. But as you look at the list, there's a whole bunch of other things that are there. Tuition or fees for online learning, tutoring services, textbooks, curriculum. I mean, it goes on and on and on and on. Now the bill then, who's eligible to get one of these grants, as originally drafted, it said you had to be at 200% of the reduced lunch level. We've knocked that down to 175%. And one of the biggest criticisms I hear is, oh my gosh, that's $90,000 for a family of 4. Well, it's a red herring, and I want to explain something. I kind of wish we didn't have any limit in there, because the reality is applicants are means tested. So if Bill Gates applied for one of these things, let's just assume it didn't have a cap on it at all, and he applied, Bill Gates would get 0. He makes too much money. Just because somebody comes in under that ceiling of 175%, that doesn't mean they get what they ask for. It means what they ask for, kind of like and I always mess this up, the FASB form or FASFA form or whatever it is. You apply for colleges, you go see what you qualify for financial aid. Just because you qualify doesn't mean you get 100%. It's means-based, and so are these grants. So the 175 to me doesn't really mean anything. What's more important is what would the individuals get. And we're going to line people up, and we're making sure that this money goes to the poorest of the poor. We are trying to help families that don't have the means. Some of us sitting in this room have the ability to send our kids to other county schools if we want, other private schools. Some of us have the ability to hire tutors, online classes, lots of things. But unfortunately, there are a lot of Kentuckians that don't, and this is a very small way to give them that ability to do what they actually think is best for their kids. So let me finish with this, and you guys can hammer me with questions. What the bill does not do, number one, it doesn't reduce our general fund. It's a tax credit, but we're reducing a different tax credit by a like amount, so it's a wash. Number two, it does not allow rich people to pay for private school. You can't do that even if private schools were in the bill, which they're not. It would never have allowed it. You can't pay for your own kid's school. There can't be any relations. There's all kinds of regs on that. This is governed by the Department of Revenue, by the way. They cover everything. And it does not do anything to hurt our public schools. If anything, this is now $25 million there to be used by every student, all the public students, and hopefully we can help kids who just don't have the choices. So that's kind of the committee sub in a nutshell. Be happy to answer questions. If I can't answer some of the technical questions, there are folks behind me that can. I will tell you truthfully, they're against the bill now because I took out private schools. But the technical side still works the same way. So their expertise can answer questions for us.
Thank you, Representative McCoy. We appreciate that. But we are having some questions lined up. We're going to keep allowing those to stack. We have some people here for and some people here against this idea. So at this point in time, we're going to take testimony. I'm going to start with the folks that are in the room. If you guys would like to come up first, offer your testimony, and then we will go to the folks online. The deal is, though, that we have an hour and a half to have this committee. So at 45 minutes, which is 30 minutes from now, I intend that we will move on to the next subject. So I would ask for brevity in your testimony, and please introduce yourself for the record and proceed.
First of all, thank you, Chairman McDaniels and Chairman Petrie, for allowing us to speak before this group. I'm the volunteer president of Ed Choice Kentucky. I know many of you I've met with personally over the last 3 or 4 years of advocating for this bill. Ed Choice Kentucky is a coalition of parents, educators, business leaders, and other professionals who are strongly in support of educational choice throughout Kentucky. There's going to be 3 of us testifying. We'll stay within the time limit you gave us. So with that.
I'm Desiree Caudle, and I am a parent from Richmond, Kentucky.
And I'm Andrew Vandiver. I'm also on the board of Ed Choice Kentucky, and I'm the Associate Director of the Catholic Conference of Kentucky. And I'm going to turn over our time to Desiree to start.
First, I would like to thank Chairman McDaniel and Chairman Petrie and the rest of the committee for letting me speak today and share my story. Again, my name is Desiree Caudle, and I'm from
Ms. Caudle, could you turn your microphone on, please?
Maybe just not be close enough.
That
there we
appears
go.
to be the case. Thank you, ma'am.
So I am from Richmond, Kentucky. I am a full-time employee, a full-time college student, and a full-time single mom of 3. My 2 youngest children go to a non-public school. They are in pre-kindergarten and 3rd grade. My oldest child goes to public school and he is in 6th grade. This is our first year at a non-public school, and we made this choice because of the COVID pandemic. I had to have in-person instruction. It was just a necessity. There was no way that I could do virtual learning, working 40 to 50 hours a week and doing night classes. So since we've been in a non-public school, we have had the most amazing experiences. My youngest son, he has sensory issues and he panics when there's a loud environment. So being in a small classroom and getting individual instructions from the teacher, this really has been a very positive effect on his education. And I'm just like every other parent, I want what's best for my kids, and I've really watched them thrive in this atmosphere. And this bill could really help me afford to keep my children in non-public schools. My daughter is 5. She's in our pre-K program. And I currently get assistance for her from child care assistance program, so that helps pay for child care. And she gets that in pre-K, but in kindergarten, she loses that assistance, so my tuition costs are going to double. And even this year with the CCAP, I've had to choose some months between paying bills and making sure that they are in the school that really meets their needs. Some children thrive in public school and others do not. As parents, we just want to see our kids succeed, and this bill would enable parents to choose the most suitable education for their family. Please consider adding non-public schools to this bill. It would truly change my children's life. Thank you.
And thank you all for having us here today, and particularly Chairman McDaniel and Chairman Petrie. Normally, in a normal year, and this is not a normal year, we'd be filling the halls with folks, parents who want educational choice, and you all have seen the folks before in the yellow scarves, hundreds, even thousands at times. Well, they can't be here today, so I wanted to be here on their behalf with some of the stories that I hear from parents. I've heard heartbreaking stories over the last few years that I've been in this job, but even more so in the last year since COVID-19 struck. So you all have packets with a couple of these stories, and I'm just going to briefly reference them so you can read the rest of their stories on your own. First is Maria from Paducah. Maria is a single mother, and she really wanted to give her child an education that involved an encouraging God-centered community that would notice his individuality and work to encourage him to be his best self. So even as a single mother, she enrolled her son in a local Catholic school in Paducah. And that school challenged him both to be mentally strong and spiritually strong, and he is now a thriving 7th grader. And it's been a wonderful experience, but it has been difficult. There's been months where she hasn't had $10 to her name between the cost of tuition and bills. And even with the assistance that her school can give her, she's still struggling. Including non-public schools in this bill would be a major help to her. And then we have another parent, Akia. Akia sent her son to Zion Christian Academy when he was in preschool, but because of financial reasons, she had to pull him out. Same to a public school, it just wasn't working for him. He really was falling behind, and she had serious concerns that he was going to get on the wrong track. She had had similar struggles with his older brother, who she also had to pull out of Zion Christian for financial reasons. So she decided to buckle down with her husband. They're working multiple jobs, and they got him back into Zion Christian in his 2nd grade year. And he's doing well. He's thriving as a 5th grader, but it is a struggle. And parents like Akia need this help, and that's why you should include non-public schools in this bill. I can tell you over the last few months, I've heard many of you praise the work that our non-public schools and our Christian schools have done, and our non-Christian schools, quite frankly, have done to get kids in the classroom this year and give them a top-notch education. I could say the same things for my kids, and maybe some of you all have had the same experience. And those schools stepped up. And I think you all should step up and help these kids, help families like Maria, help parents like Akia when they need it most. And with that said, I'm finished with my testimony. I'm going to transfer over to Charlie.
Charlie, if we wrap this up in about 3 minutes here, we'd appreciate it.
Well, thank you. You have heard from both Desiree and Andrew, and I'm not going to repeat more family horror stories about what's been going on. But I do want to instead pivot to one thing about the bill as is now. originally crafted, the bill was very specific in trying to be as inclusive as possible. The changes this year that were put into the bill to address all students is effectively lost by taking out the non-public schools. So now we're back to a very narrow and tight application, which is essentially back to having no choice again. There's no way for a child to really have choice. Originally, we didn't care. Well, the only test that was being applied was a financial test. It said if you had money, you had to pay for it. Now it's only public school. The second thing, and I'm kind of a business person, so I'm taking it from another perspective I'd like for y'all to think about, and that is, in a much broader context, and that is that without the non-public school option, Kentucky now will be the only state, and I say will be because the two on each side of us are finishing up their legislation, but it'll be the only state east of the Rockies and south of the Great Lakes that doesn't have private school choice. Imagine that. One spot in the middle of the whole eastern part of the United States, and it's Kentucky. Second thing I say about that is that you really need to think about the implications of businesses that will not locate to Kentucky because they do not believe they can get a good education for their child. That's a serious issue that an A&R committee ought to really think about. Think about also about the businesses leaving the state because their employees need more options. That's another serious issue. But most of all, I ask you to think of the implications for the children in Kentucky. Those children that the school they're in just simply doesn't fit their needs. It's not something that you do next year, the year after. It affects their life and their life forever. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you guys both very much for being here today. We do appreciate it. Since our next person to testify is online, Representative McCoy, I'm going to invite you back up to the table while she speaks. Ms. D. Pregliasco, I hope I got your name correct, ma'am.
Yes, you did.
Very good. Go ahead and proceed, please.
And you can hear me correctly?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. I'm Dee Pregliasco. I'm Vice President of the League of Women Voters of Kentucky. I'm not here to speak to the original provisions of House Bill 563, but I'm here to voice our opposition to adding original provisions of House Bill 149 to the bill. The League of Women Voters of Kentucky has long supported adequate funding of K through 12 public schools. And in response to the prior speakers, I would say that all of those things could have been provided for them if in fact our public schools are adequately funded and that we have enough teachers and have smaller classes. Public education is essential in building a society in which citizens can participate effectively in our democracy and are able to fulfill their individual potential and talents. And this public education history goes back to obviously New England, the Northwest Territory, moving west, providing public schools. We oppose HB House Bill 149 because it will divert much needed money from the state's underfunded public schools at a time when funding is even more desperately needed to compensate for the toll that COVID has taken on education. There's a long understanding that everyone's taxes should support public schools because they benefit society as a whole. By siphoning off any amount, large or small, of an expanding pot of money that we hope is going to be available from the state's general fund or because of tax credits, whatever it might be, would do serious damage not only to Kentucky schools, but to also the other state programs that are needed to move Kentucky forward. It's my information that companies don't come to Kentucky because we don't put enough money in our public schools. The Kentucky Center for Economic Policy estimates that according to them, in the first year, any tax credit created by House Bill 149 would cost Kentucky's budget $25 million, and in 10 years, over $1 billion. The League of Women Voters of Kentucky asked this committee to vote no to any bill or amendment that would provide tax credits for contributions that effectively provide tax dollars to private schools, such as House Bill 149 and Senate Bill 25. I say all of this to you not only as the vice president of the league, but as a former teacher in both public and private schools. And my children have gone to both public and private schools, but public schools are the basic and barest and best foundation for our democratic society. Thank you for this time. I'll be glad to take any questions also.
Thank you, ma'am. And we do have some members beginning to line up with some questions at this point. Just as a reminder, at 3:15, we will cut this testimony off. So please limit yourself to questions and not commentary at this point. So first up was Senator Carroll. Oh, I'm sorry. Co-Chair Petrie,
Mr. Chairman, if I could just respond to just a couple of things.
McCoy, yes,
Yeah,
go
thank you,
ahead.
sir. The last presenter, just so everybody is aware, we've changed that bill. So some of her comments simply just are not applicable. Private schools are taken out. It is capped at the $25 million. So I just kind of want to make sure everybody understands that. Thank you.
Very good, sir. Okay, Senator Carroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Representative McCoy, thank you for your presentation. Two brief questions. What is the max amount that any one contributor can make for the tax credit? And is there any guarantee of equal distribution of these tax credits throughout the state?
I don't know about the max amount. I might have to defer to Charlie on that. But as far as the other one, there's this concept of the intermediary, which makes sure that the money would be available to everybody around the state if you didn't have a local authorizing authority in your area.
Senator, you have to go to the Federal Registry to determine what the maximum amount is. It is a sliding scale depending upon the number of dependents in the house and then whether it's single or dual working families. So it's very difficult to just pick a set number.
Okay. So once the contribution is made, then is that designated for a specific area, or is it distributed throughout the state? Does the contributor designate what area it goes to?
Okay. The donor contributes to an account granting organization that may be set up. The bill allows a variety of what they call AGOs to be set up, and it might be a community of counties, for example, in your area, maybe 5 western counties, and they choose to give to that AGO, or they choose to give to one in Louisville or one in Pikeville or wherever. But the bill also provided for an intermediary AGO to approach large businesses and high net worth people who would give to that, and then that AGO would then doesn't deal with children, but deals with all the other AGOs to try to equalize resources to demands.
All right, thank you, sir. We're going to have to move to Senator West now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative McCoy, for this bill is not for the faint of heart, for sure. It's a big topic. Just thought of this question as I came in. We've got the tax status. You know, you get the tax benefit of giving. Is it possible, how would it look? Let's say you have an organization, Toyota, for instance. They want to give to education, and maybe you cap out on the tax benefit, but they want to give anyway. Could they still give under this scenario? Could they give to the AGO and not receive the tax benefit, but put money in the pot, so to speak?
Clearly, if they chose to do that, they can do that right now. It would be an incentive for them to contribute to an AGO and get a credit. And they're the exact kind of company you would approach at the intermediary one, so that they don't have to deal with 360 other AGOs. If they say, well, no, that's your problem. I'll give to this central one and then get redistributed.
Thank you, sir. Representative Wilner. I believe Representative Wilner is on.
Thank you very much. Yes. So I agree. This is a big topic. It's not for the faint of heart. I appreciate Representative McCoy acknowledging that we don't have all of this figured out yet. It's extremely complicated. I guess my first question is why the hurry to get this done now, day 25 of a day, 30-day session. And in a related question, this seems like an enormous lift for the Department of Revenue, and I wonder if they have been consulted as part of these conversations.
Well, I would like to point out this is hardly a new bill. In fact, we have been talking about it for years. So the fact that we're here today on this particular day is nothing more than just the timing of making the sausage up here. I personally have not talked to the Department of Revenue.
We did. Last year, they did an in-depth study of it when it was referred to as school choice or scholarship tax credits. And the difference between that mechanism and this one, they're identical. What Representative McCoy did was add both additional students and additional services. But no, they're prepared, and they do this already with, like in Dow, Kentucky is a similar credit. They maintain it. You go on the website and determine whether there's any available and so on like that.
All right. Thank you, Representative Wilner. We'll go to Representative Riley.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple quick scenarios, and I'll give them both, and then you can answer them as I do. Scenario number one, small independent district, 250 students in the high school, 25 students really bright, 25 students are weak, want to go to the large public high school next to them. The large public high school decides they're going to put a scenario where they only take the bright students. Is that possible to do in that scenario? Second one, ECE student, Washington County, severely disabled. I'm just making this up. Severely disabled in Washington County, wants to go to Nelson County High School because they have a good ECE program with a teacher that maybe they're a family friend with. What happens to the transportation of that student?
I think both of those questions, Representative, would be handled by the local school board. It's going to be up to them to adopt their policy. One of the changes, I spoke to some folks on the other side of the aisle this morning that might be made to this is having those policies presented then to KDE to sort of make sure we address those issues. But, for example, on the transportation, we're not going to require a district to transport in and out of their district, that kind of thing. That's going to be up to the parents to do.
Thank you, Representative Riley. Representative Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for the opposition. What is being done, if anything, to keep high-performing independent districts from being threatened to close by the local county district? Is she still on?
That was for the lady with,
Yes.
That was for Mrs. Pregliasco.
And I'm sorry, I heard the question, but I don't understand the question.
Let me see if I can rephrase it. Sometimes in some of our county or the high performing independent schools, sometimes they feel threatened by the local district schools with some type of action to force their closure. Is there anything, if anything, being done to maybe prevent that or curtail that?
And I'm not the person to answer that question. That's going to be a Department of Education, or that's going to be a local policy, school board issue. That's not something that I can answer.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Senator Gibbons.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Leader McCoy, thanks for bringing this legislation. I want to share a quick story, and I move directly to a comment. 2009 was the first session I was here, and we had a significant piece of school turnaround legislation to deal with in that session. It was Senate Bill 1. It was for persistently low achieving schools. And one of the components we put in as a turnaround option was charter schools. And the opposition to that rose up and wrung their hands and said, if we only had more time, we could consider this. We could consider giving children a path to a good education if we only had more time. Thank you for bringing it. We're 12 years later. We still see opposition wringing their hands saying if we only had more time. The time is now. The children and families have suffered, as evidenced by the young lady that came to the table. Thanks for leading on this. I wish the private option was still there. I understand the challenges you're facing. I wish it were still there. I'm going to actually direct my question, though, as you and I have had some conversation about this, specifically the open borders piece. I want you to consider an amendment. Go with me on page 3. This is not going to be active until July 1 of 2022. You and I have discussed a way whereby the money at the local level moves to pay any tuition. Consider this: if you start with your pen on line 10, you put a period after the word resides, and you strike the rest of that paragraph, this is existing language. It says the fee shall be paid by the Board of Education of the school district in which the pupil resides. Any disputes already have to be settled by the Kentucky Board of Education. This doesn't mean we can't come back and work as a task force on finding a way to adequately fund children that go from public to public. But schools in some areas don't fit the families that live there. Either their workplace, some disagreement between competitive districts, something's going on that's preventing children from moving from the district they reside in to the district that has capacity and will accept them. And this has got to be about children. It can't be about systems. It's got to be about children. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Senator, and I absolutely consider it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Gibbons. Representative Hatton.
Thank you. I have a number of questions. I'll save most of them. I know we're short on time. I'll save them for tomorrow when we're voting. But I'm getting a lot of people weighing in opposition to this this legislation. One of the main concerns I'm seeing is that education service provider absolutely could include a private school. So my first question would be, is that true? Is a private school an entity that can qualify as an education service provider under this bill?
For what purpose, Representative?
Well, for any purpose, so that they might benefit from making some money off this legislation.
So I guess if they were going to offer a summer camp, because that's there. I guess if they were going to offer a tutoring service, that would be there. But there's no way for them to get the entirety, to get the tuition paid. That's what's been taken out. And I guess, you really guess what's the definition of a private school? If I'm a tutor and I'm doing that after school, am I a private school? I mean, these kids are not going to be able to leave public school to run over during school hours to go to a private school to have an hour of math tutoring and then come back to their public school. So, I mean, I think yes, but I'm not really sure.
Follow-up, please.
Yes, ma'am. And
then a follow-up question. Again, I've got a bunch, but just trying to narrow down here my concerns. It looks like about 63% of Kentucky's kids would qualify under this 175% of poverty level. And then I don't see any guidelines for oversight about requiring schools to not discriminate. And it may be that you're going to tell me that that's just up to the individual school districts to enact their own policies, but I'm worried that this could lead to a situation where basically a lot of fairly wealthy kids by the standards of Eastern Kentucky could take advantage of this, and then we could, in other areas, basically resegregate our schools. I don't see any requirements against discriminating against handicapped kids or children because of their race.
And in your district, where are these kids going?
I'm sorry?
In Letcher County, where are these kids going?
What kids?
You indicated the rich kids in Eastern Kentucky under this policy are going to be leaving and going somewhere.
No, I'm just saying that 63% of kids would qualify under the 175% of guidelines. We're a poorer school district.
Understand, but again, as a practical matter, it's only eligible if they're going to a public school. In Letcher County, what are the other public schools they're going to, and are there real capacity issues? And there would be. I'm guaranteeing the schools next to you don't have a lot of open slots. So the boogeyman of, oh my gosh, people are going to be running and fleeing, where are they going?
Well, as a practical matter, that may be true in my district. And there's 120 different counties in this state that may, but then can you answer the question about where's the guidelines for preventing discrimination?
So the only discrimination that we've addressed is about non-resident. It would be a local school board, the folks that you've elected to be on your school board that are making those policies. So that's a local control issue.
Thank you, Representative. At this point, I need to go to Representative Raymond and then Senator Carroll for a quick clarification, and then we have to move along. So Representative Raymond, the floor is yours, ma'am.
Yes, thank you. I have a couple concerns about child welfare that I hope we can continue to work on. The first is around protections for students when they're interacting with an education service provider. I don't see oversight here or quality control. I want to make sure that if a student's family chooses a tutor, for example, that person is qualified or certified, that they're actually helping the student to thrive, and also that the student is physically and emotionally safe. After what we've seen with USA Gymnastics and USA Cheerleading, I don't know if I'm looking for a background check or some other criteria, but I think we need to add in a protection to students. So the question is, are you open to that?
As we discussed, I'm absolutely open to it. But, you know, we have tutors right now and we don't have those protections. You know, at least to my knowledge, I don't think there's anything going on for private tutors right now. But happy to look at anything like that.
And then the second, I want to echo concerns about the discrimination piece. I think there is something expressly stipulated in this sub that says that education service providers would not be required to alter their creed, practices, admissions policy, or curriculum. And I'm worried that a family could receive limited options from an account granting organization. And if they have an LGBT child, for example, who was unwelcome at that education service provider, then they wouldn't have those services.
And hopefully this is where the marketplace will work, and that family wouldn't choose to try to get a tutor that wouldn't like their kid, because it's going to be up to them to make the application.
Very well. Thank you, Representative Raymond. Senator Carroll, last one to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to get clarification on this equal distribution. I'm not comfortable in any way with this. Is it possible for a few donors in an urban area to take up the entire $20 million of tax credits, and all that money, all that benefit end up in one urban area and the rest of the state just get left out?
You say, is it possible?
Yes.
It could happen.
But
that's very remote, but I understand your question.
So why weren't there limits put to assure some type of equality in the distribution? My people in West Kentucky, the people in Eastern Kentucky, there is not accumulation of wealth in those areas. So you're asking us to take $20 million in revenue away from this Commonwealth that potentially will go to one area of this state. And even though I support school choice, I struggle with the structure of this legislation.
There's nothing preventing someone from Eastern Kentucky or Western Kentucky applying to a granting organization that happens to be in Covington. There aren't geographic limits on this. Anyone can apply.
Very well. With that, we have to finish the debate there. I'm sure we could go all night if we so chose. But to both sides of this, thank you all for your time, for your testimony today. We sincerely appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right, moving along. We have House Bills 587 and 588, sponsored by Representative Ken Fleming. And I believe, Representative, you will be joined by a number of people throughout, to include the President of the Senate. So my request to everyone coming to the table, as you get there, please identify yourself for the record before you begin your testimony. So, Representative, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Petrie, and the members of the committee. The Joint Committee, I ask you to appreciate their time. I'm Ken Fleming, represent the 48th District, and with me is?
Representative Pam Stevenson, Representative District 43.
What I'd like to do, Mr. Chairman, is Representative Stevenson and I will talk for about just a few minutes, and then we'll have the President and Yvonne Smith will come up, and some other people, and they'll Senator Neal to come and talk more about the particular details of the bills and so forth. So we just want to basically sort of tee things up and let y'all know what's going on. Representative Stevenson and I are very, very excited to have this bill before you all, because I really think it's something that we're truly trying to bridge the gap. I got involved with this when I was asked to do this, to help out, to bridge the gap, and like I said, I'm very excited in doing this. Some of y'all know I was on Metro Council for quite a few years, and in my experience, we allocated, and the Metro Council members have discretionary accounts that we can allocate to particular areas of our district, but it also can go anywhere in the county. And I took my money and helped out Councilman George Unsel when he was living, to help out several areas that he was representative of, like the California area. So I've always been involved and always been very keenly mindful of bridging the gap between the various parts of the community. And by doing this and working with a representative, Stevenson, I think it's a continuation of that. I just want to let y'all know that what we do for Louisville, what we try to help out Louisville, it's going to help out the rest of the part of the state. And I'll give you a real quick example of what we need to do, not only in helping Louisville, but also help the state. I don't know if y'all know this, but 10 counties in Kentucky, East Kentucky, 35% poverty. In the west end of Louisville, 32%. Folks that have bachelor's degrees, 8% in East Kentucky, 10% in Western Kentucky. Unemployment is 8% in East Kentucky, 10% in west end Louisville. And then you have people on food stamps, 36% in Eastern Kentucky, 40% in West End Louisville. And the median income basically is the same in both areas. So I hope y'all understand there's a parallel, there is a dire need to help out not only West End Louisville, but also throughout the state. But if we can get together and come together and put this type of bill together to elevate individuals, to give them a more opportunity to not only help their families out, but also help their community out, I think it'd be very, very beneficial. Representative, sorry about that.
I was born and raised in West Louisville, and here's what I will tell you, that there are hard-working families that all they want is the opportunity for their children to thrive. And if you were to put it in numbers, almost 80 cents out of every dollar leaves West Louisville and goes to another neighborhood. When I came back home from the military, I was shocked that I had to drive 30 minutes for a Starbucks. So the things that we have done over a period of time has made West Louisville a place where there are not businesses, there are not opportunities for thriving families to thrive. Put it another way, if West Louisville were a city, and I am not suggesting that, with 69,000 residents, it would be the third largest city in the state of Kentucky. You can't have the third largest city population-wise suffer through redlining and all the other things that have been done over the years and expect us, Kentucky, to get from the bottom of the list to the top. So this is a Kentucky issue, and this is an answer for what Kentucky wants to do in the future. And I'd now like to invite up to the table where the bill started in the Senate with a full cooperation among all types of people, Democrats, Republicans, short, tall, beautiful, ugly. We're all in it.
Beautiful, ugly.
Do you want to comment specifically as to which attributes apply to the president?
I would never say that about the president.
As they come up, I'm just going to let you know, the two bills in the Senate and the House, they basically mirror each other. We are working on a committee substitute with the Senate as well with the Representative Stevenson about doing this. So that's forthcoming, but I'll turn it over to the guests.
Good afternoon. First of all, thank you so very much for giving us this time to present this and to answer any questions that you may have. I'm going to get right into it. I'm going to roll through some of the things that I think are benefits, and perhaps after that we can get into some of the particulars. And I'm going to defer to my colleague here, Yvonne Smith, with respect to that. But in fact, I think I'll defer to her first. Why don't we do that? And you go ahead and get into some of the technical pieces.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having us. First, my name is Yvonne Smith. I'm the CEO and president of One West, which is the nonprofit that was started by the Bingham Fellows class of 2014 from Leadership Louisville. One West has been working on community economic development for the past 5 years. I was recruited to Kentucky from North Carolina, so I have been working in this field from banking to economic development for the past 30 years. So I kind of consider myself a subject matter expert in that regard, focused solely on low resource communities. And one of the things that we did when we started having this discussion with Senator Stivers and Senator Neal, one of the things that we focused on was this issue of how do we reconnect the west end of Louisville to the entire city in a very impactful and economic way, as well as handling the concerns that the community had around gentrification. We did, One West, in 2019, we did a conference around gentrification, and we took all 9 neighborhoods and had roundtables to discuss what their concerns were. And what we learned was the biggest concern was fear of forced displacement with the investments that were being made around revitalization. And that helped us to understand it wasn't an issue of a fear of a white person moving in next to you. It wasn't a fear of losing your culture. It was a fear that you could no longer reside in your own neighborhood once revitalization happened. So this bill is imperative, not only from the standpoint that it will create revenue and opportunities for future investment, but it will also handle the concern around forced displacement. The other thing that is so significant about this is a 30-year freeze for these residents that are currently homeowners is, bar none, one of the most aggressive that we've seen in the country. And it is imperative because what we have seen all around the country is forced displacement and gentrification and a lack of people of color once revitalization happens. And then also a lack of affordability. Now, one of the things I think Kentucky has the ability to do that most cities have failed at is to start off with the end in mind. How do we learn from the mistakes that have been made in Nashville, in other cities, Denver, and across the country? Charlotte has been here. We've invited Durham to come. We've talked with them about their challenges. We've invited Nashville here. We've had those discussions around what do you wish you had done, and it's this. So we're right on the cusp of what other cities are trying to backtrack and do now. The other thing I want to let you know is in my career, I was instrumental and the leader in economic development in downtown Winston-Salem, North Carolina. We removed the blight, which no one seemed to be able to do. We had fractions that couldn't talk to one another and that were at odds with one another. Once we removed the blight and started making the investment, we did a master plan of $100 million. We got about $25 million in, and R.J. Reynolds started donating property to Wake Forest University. Wake Forest now has 40 acres of property that they are revitalizing, and they are well over the $200 million mark. Our plan got $50 million in, and we were able to see not only impact in Winston-Salem, but impact around the region. And this is really how it starts. R.J. Reynolds bought in, Haynes Brand bought in, and others began to buy in. It impacted the downtown, and the level of commerce that took place not only happened with the new business investment, the jobs that were created, and the additional resources that came on the education side, but the infrastructure investment improved, and we saw the community begin to rise and elevate, as well as the areas that adjoined the community out in the rural market. It is so imperative that we work collaboratively to get this TIF in place, because also we're dealing with an area of the city that has been broken and has suffered from so many disparities. And the community itself is ready for revitalization, job creation, access to transportation, access to amenities for their families. We are in such a herald position in that we now see a good portion of the community. You're talking about 60,000 residents, 350 blocks, and they're getting their primary groceries from the dollar store. We have got to change the trajectory of what's happening, and that's any community in Kentucky. We are positioned to be a regional leader, and we have to start with this highly dense area with, as Representative Stevens said, with families that have been working class families and care about their community. We have to have resources to make the change happen, and only you all are able to do that. And I only brought you the North Carolina example. We could go on and on with areas across the country that have interjected these types of things and tools. Some have done it well, some not so well. But we are able to do a very good job here by starting out with the end in mind. And I would just implore you to please consider this seriously, because we're at a point now in the West End, children are dying daily. There is so much need that the pandemic has escalated, and we just can't afford to wait any longer. So the reason for why now, the reason for why the urgency is because with the small amount of investment you've seen with the Beecher Terrace addition and then the $50 million investment in the track, the Russell neighborhood alone is going to have a rise in values and a rise in taxes that will obliterate some of the residents that have held that community down all these years. So I'm just asking that you all seriously consider this bill. We know that it will impact the entire state because Louisville is a major economic engine for our state, and there's no sense in leaving 1/4 of Louisville struggling and void of the resources necessary.
Thank you very much. I think I didn't state for the record, I'm State Senator Gerald A Neal, and I'm a co-sponsor along with Senator Stivers of this particular legislation. I want to describe a little bit the process that took place here. This had, to put this bill together and to arrive at this destination, we took maybe almost 9 months, a little short of 9 months of going through a process of asking questions in the community, asking questions of ourselves, looking to see what mechanisms there were that are available that can address maybe some of the answers to some of the questions that were being raised. And what we found out was that through that process, which was partially a learning process for ourselves, and bringing in technical assistance and so forth, we arrived at the product that we have here and the bill that we have before you. So the first thing that we did, and we all came together on it. It was an amazing process, quite frankly. But what we did was we defined the area. That was the first thing we wanted to do. What is the logical break of this area? So we defined the natural relationship of what we were trying to do to the natural development or the borders of various neighborhoods. And we identified 9 neighborhoods, what we generally would call west of 9th Street to the river in Louisville, and then north of roughly Algonquin Parkway to the river. So there are 9 neighborhoods in that particular area. In those neighborhoods, we began to look at what was the home ownership rates in those areas. And I think we came to about roughly 39% or 40% in that particular area, because that was key to our consideration, because we knew that part of whatever we were going to do had to be based upon how do we stabilize home ownership and then build out from there. So there was enough mass in terms of home ownership to work with respect to that. So we had this central question of gentrification, how we deal with that particular piece. We recognize that there are a lot of strategies that relates to anti-gentrification, but within this particular bill, one of the key things that we addressed that we understood and knew was going to be important was that many people get displaced because if you're successful in revitalizing, it raises the valuations, that translates into higher payments and taxes. People get displaced. A lot of those folks are older. A lot of them are in these homes for life. And so what we did, we took all that in consideration and realized that if we embarked upon a 30-year tax cap, in other words, the valuations would still go up, but the payments with respect to those properties would be capped over that 30-year period, that if we also extended that to the heirs of those individuals who were going to make that particular property their primary residence, then that would lay the foundation, at least from the standpoint that we were coming from, of an anti-gentrification type of move. But we also recognize that in doing this particular piece, that we had to make sure that there were some other dynamics, coordination, for instance, with city government and various other kinds of dynamics and interests that were operating in the area, including nonprofits and so forth. So we built that particular piece in terms of our investigation as to how this could fit together in the real world. Part of this, of course, was aimed at economic development. So we knew that there had to be funding in that particular regard. So how do you fund without raising somebody's taxes in this situation? That's why the TIF became something that was realistic in terms of this piece. Except the twist in this situation is that this has one that's driven really by the community. Not a community devoid of the expertise, because you're talking about how finance has to be in that mix when you deal with that kind of thing and the complexities of what we're dealing with. But the fact of the matter is that became the governance piece that was driven by participation of not only those individuals that had the expertise to do this, but also to guarantee, at least on the 17 member board, at least 5 of those that come out of those 9 neighborhoods and rotate those. Ideally, what we would like to see is 9 of them, 1 coming out of each of those neighborhoods on that board. They would do the plan. We wouldn't do the planning. They would do the planning. And of course, they'd have access to other expertise throughout Louisville in terms of getting that done as well. But notwithstanding that particular piece, the question still is, where does the money come from in this regard? Well, in this plan, what we're proposing is that private and public interest would put $20 million into this from the front, and that would trigger $10 million, hopefully, from the state, and that would be a $30 million initial investment in this piece. That will get it off the dime, so to speak. But what we know will happen, because we've seen it in other communities that we've looked at, that once you have an intentional plan like this that's projected to do certain kinds of things, and it's something that others that have as their mission this type of activity in terms of recovering and revitalizing communities, that you draw their interest in there. So we expect that kind of involvement and input and further investment in that regard. But also it opens up private enterprise. It opens up the private investment sector with respect to this. That's a very central part, because what we're really trying to do on the economic development piece, as you all know, those that are familiar with economies and so forth, you got to turn money over in your community several times if you're going to make that a healthy economic environment. So trying to deal with those who have existing businesses in the community, generating the activity of other business initiatives in the community, and the building that economic infrastructure is key to that. It doesn't exclude larger enterprise, but we also recognize, let's say as an example, if someone came in and wanted to invest and they wanted to do a multi-unit apartment complex or something. Well, part of what we would do, of course, would build in affordable homeowner dynamics to make sure that we don't price out people that would want to stay in their community with respect to that. So these are the kinds of things and mechanisms that we built in for those who are driving the plan, the ultimate plans, the macro plans, the micro plans that are necessary to make this happen, and the necessary interaction and coordination and articulation between these plans. That will give them a lot to work with, but it give them a framework and leverage to do those things that would keep this in the framework of the intentions of our objectives here. So there's a lot of other factors that we could answer to. I'm not sure I can get into all of them, because I got to tell you, this was a long, long discussion. I can't think of anything I've been involved in my 30-plus years in this legislature that I've put this much time in. And I went to school with respect to that. I have to concede. But I've learned a lot. And I've learned that if you put faith and trust in people, good people, who want to do good by themselves and by their neighbors, and if you want to empower them to have the ability to move from 0, 10, or 15 to 100, then this is one initiative that I think that can do this. I just want to make another point, and then I'm going to turn it over to whoever the next President Stivers. Let me say this. This is not necessarily a model that we're saying, or I'm saying here, let me speak for myself here, that, look, let's take this and let's see how this works, and let's just fan this out all over Kentucky, or let's fan this out all over Louisville. But guess what? It will inform us. The experience that comes out of this will inform us as to what kinds of options and what kind of variations and what kinds of strategies that we can use in other areas in Kentucky. So it's not just about So goes Louisville, so goes Kentucky. Of course, there's obviously a lot of good argument related to that. But also, I think it has lessons to be learned that I think will inform our other communities across Kentucky that may be in a framework by which we can use some of the lessons that we learned from this particular initiative. So I'm going to stop right there and be happy to answer any questions. Turn it over to President Stivers, if I may.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Yvonne, Gerald, our representatives, Morgan. Gerald, and I've known him for 24 and a half years now, so I apologize for the lack of decorum and formality. But I've called him Gerald because I've known him for 25 years almost. He is right about this is a potential way to do things. So when you start thinking about Newport, Covington, Bowling Green, Owensboro, Henderson, Murray, Paducah, Louisville, Ashland, hopefully we are going to create a model, may need some adaptation, may not. I'm certain there will be. But the essence of this is something that we can expand and use this experience in an area that is Jefferson County, which is over 1/6 of our population. For the area designated, would be the 4th largest city in the state. To take a TIF, tax increment financing, that which is generated would then be rolled back in above this floor, would roll back into the city. The second component is the raising of public and private dollars at the Louisville level for a board that will have quite a bit of institutional knowledge, because you're talking about significant dollars here, potentially significant dollars. So when you look at the groups, and Senator McGarvey Morgan was involved with individuals like Steve Poe, who I think was here last week, that talked about he had actually been investment deals of over $500 million in Louisville, Craig Greenberg, individuals like that, along with this components of people from the community to understand what the community needs are. I think that's a pretty dynamic board. And so it goes through and how we match the money, use the money, plow the money back in for the opportunity to change the economic trajectory. I'm now going to quote Chris Fugit, who talked about the criminal justice system the other day, and I listened to what he said, that when he gets called out on a call and somebody's wielding a knife, that is only a symptom of the problem. The problem is education, economic opportunity, hope, and despair. This is a real shot to try to change that trajectory. This is by far broader than even this bill, because Senator McGarvey, Senator Givens, others passed over Senate Bill 270, which will create a different educational dynamic around Simmons College and K-State, with a portal of a neighborhood place being placed there to give those services to traditional and non-traditional students who want to get an education degree, and in the California area around Simmons College. So what we did early on, and it was close to 9 months, we started listening, researching, listening more, asking questions. We've gone through chapters 169 through 176 of the Constitution. Morgan and I have had various discussions on those pesky issues related to the Constitution to try to draft in a way that would meet and be in conformity with the various holdings, because there are certain constitutional parameters related to assessment and collection of taxes and classifications of property. So we continued to meet, go back and forth. I don't know how many times we were in meetings with individuals there, and individuals that were interested to come up with this product. And the governance, I know there's some questions that have been raised about open records, transparency. Yeah, we're all for those. That needs to be there. We know there's some amendments. We were working literally up to the Sunday night drafting this before we introduced it and announced it in Louisville. But to me, this is a true opportunity to look at the root causes of what Representative Fugit talked about in this area and then potentially go out in the state and model it. It's easier to go here because of the population density right now. But what can that be replicated? Where can that be replicated throughout the state if we can see true trajectory change? And then what you will see, in my hopes, educational attainment levels change, families stay locked together tighter, economic opportunity becomes available to people. Are there still going to be problems, warts, scars, and pimples? Without a doubt. But the likelihood of it being reduced, and you see in the justice system that we're taking people outside of that system, is greatly changed. So that's kind of the premise we went under and kind of the thought process. I know people are going to have a lot of opportunities, but I can't thank the individuals enough because it was hard to keep this quiet, and a lot of people didn't know all the meetings we were having and all the work that went on looking at statutes, looking and working with the revenue cabinet, working with the individuals there to where we have gotten to this point. I ask you all to look at this, and the reason I want to thank both our representatives is, by Constitution, we cannot start a revenue-raising measure, which means up or down in the Senate. We can only amend thereto by the Constitution. So we wanted to put both the bills together to move them at one time because it's easier and more logical to explain what the purpose of this is. So to Nikki, to Senator Neal, Nikki Lanier, I should connect Nikki Lanier, who is involved in this, who is on the Federal Reserve out of St. Louis, Yvonne, Senator Neal, Senator McGarvey, Steve Poe, City Councilman and Senate and Metro Council Chair David James, many others. We spent a lot of hours working on this and trying to decipher a path forward that I think we've come with a pretty good product that hopefully maybe with some tweaks by the time we get to the end of the session, we may be able to pass some type of legislation that really plays into a holistic look at changing the trajectory of that area that we have defined in this TIF. With that, Senator McGarvey, Morgan.
Thank you, Robert. I'll be brief because you guys have heard a lot already. I just took a few notes of maybe a few things I wanted to highlight. First, I also want to thank Senator Julie Rocky Adams, who was a big part of this group as well. And for those of you who know her, I want credit for bringing her up. But appreciate you guys listening to this. This has been a real process. And I think back to when it started, right after David McAtee was killed. And Robert said, keeping this quiet. I wish you all could have driven. We didn't have these meetings in Clay County. We didn't have them in Frankfort. And if you all had driven and seen me and Robert and Gerald and Julie sitting in a building down on 18th and Broadway with a bunch of community members, here's what we had in our hands: a pen and a blank sheet of paper. Because we went to listen. And we know it's time for the General Assembly to do something. You've heard revitalization a lot in these discussions about the west end of Louisville that we're talking about. I want to impress upon you, it is revitalization. The West End was home to Brown and Williamson. It was home to Philip Morris. It was home to Rubber Town. They didn't see the benefits from those tax dollars and those jobs. What they had was a redlined area that told people where they could and couldn't live, and discrimination in banking and housing practices. We have to go in and understand that background to be able to draft something to get through people as diverse as the Kentucky General Assembly that will help the community that we're intent upon helping. The first thing we heard is that has to be community-driven change. That can't just come from us. We are the legislators up here who ultimately pass the law. But the change needs to be led and driven by the community. We accomplish that with not just the composition of the board, but the fact the board self-perpetuates. It chooses its own leaders. They're not going to be people in Frankfort leading this. That board reflects what the neighborhood looks like. That's a big part of what we're trying to do. Senator Stivers told you he thought we changed it last on a Sunday night. That's the one thing I'll disagree with you on, Robert. We had a Zoom at 8:15 that morning before the press conference at 10 o'clock where we were still making changes, and we are still making changes as we continue to host informational sessions and get input from the community. One thing we are going to look at, we have the guardrails put in for displacement with the tax structure. We have another guardrail with the makeup of the board, what the board can do, the directives of the board to invest in residents and businesses who are already there, to make sure that there are affordable housing components built of any project that comes in. But we are also looking at and have been working on rent gouging statutes, knowing that 60% of the people who live in the TIF development zone are renters. I want to leave time for questions, but I do want to say that we appreciate your consideration of this bill and thank all the people who've worked on it.
Thank you, Senator McGarvey. At this time, we are going to open it up. We've got a list of questions. Oh, Mr. President.
I just want to say this. To the depth that we looked at this, when we start quoting sections of the Constitution, we had a plat map, and I wanted people to understand the overall scheme. There's over 5,000 parcels of property in this area that are either not performing, abandoned, or in the position to be foreclosed on for failure to generate and pay their taxes. 5,000 parcels. So you think if we get those up to income generating parcels, they're now currently non-revenue generating parcels. And if you look at this TIF language, 80% of all that's new that's generated stays there. 20% comes back in the system. That's 20% we didn't even have and probably won't have unless we truly change the dynamics and trajectory.
Thank you,
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
President. All right, start with Representative Goforth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President, I appreciate your work on this legislation. This is a lot of tax dollars, though, and I need to be able to explain to the people in, say, Jackson County, which is one of the poorest counties in the entire nation, top 5 usually, why we're giving such a tax break to this area in Kentucky and not folks in Jackson County in helping stimulate that economy and bring industry to that part of our state. So could you explain?
Well, first of all, understand this would not hurt or impact the current revenue that is generated there. This is tax increment financing, so only new spurred, stimulated revenue, which would be spurred by this, would be that which is not brought into the state coffers or the municipal coffers. We're basically creating a floor and all new revenue, and it has not. And that's why I gave the statistic about the non-generating pieces of property. The reality is the revenues from that end are probably flat or stagnant. They're dropping. So we're not giving anybody a break unless they bring new dollars in and generate new taxes.
What about the $10 million that's in? Is that in addition or separate or included in that?
Separate and distinct.
Okay.
But this is very similar to what I would equate to equalizing nickels. First of all, there has to be the local participation and local match, and upon that, we would then do the match from the state level. So in many cases, we don't have the tax base in Jackson County, and actually the second poorest zip code zone in the state is the California precinct in West Louisville. The first is Owsley County, my county. So I'm very well aware of poverty and things that exist. But some of the things in the area in the way of rural development are not accessible in metropolitan areas. So that is where, if you think about 1/6 of all revenues that are generated in this state come from Jefferson County, what if we generated more revenues that then would be dispersed out to counties that aren't capable because of just natural growth and infrastructure of a municipality? It's kind of unusual, but the reality of Louisville being Louisville is because of a natural consequence of waterfalls. some 350, 400 years ago, because everybody had to ford the falls. But I think it would benefit the whole state if you see this opportunity come to that one section of the state. And it's not taking monies, except for that, I will admit. It does that, but that is, to me, a small portion in a $12.5 billion budget to try to create something for an area that would be the 4th largest city in the state.
Thank you, Representative Goforth.
Appreciate that.
Senator
Thank
West.
you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to everyone for bringing this forward. I know, Senator Neal, you're passionate about schools, especially West End, and to have good community redevelopment, you got to have a good neighborhood school, right? That would be a good component for that. And I think it's appalling, the lack of school construction in the West End over the years, past 50 years, let's say. The tax cap. I know the purpose of the tax cap is to prevent gentrification. But in order to get that school funding that you need, was the idea that we're not getting the taxes anyway, so let's hope we can get more taxes into the system and work it through that way? And maybe you can help me as a Louisville legislator. Does that money flow up to JCPS and then come back down, or is the West End its own distinct district? Garvey, you mind? Don't mind?
A quick note on school construction in Jefferson County. The last high school built in Jefferson County was before we put a man on the moon. That's anywhere in the entire county. So just know that we'd like some new schools built in Jefferson County as well, Senator West. I think I'm testifying in front of the right committee for that. No, JCPS property taxes are a little different animal than what we're talking about from the state property taxes. And what would happen is the JCPS property taxes are collected countywide and all go to JCPS, to the central. There's not a carve out of where it comes from in that regard. What we are trying to do in the language that we have is keep everyone's tax payments the same. If you were living in the West End Opportunity Zone, if you're living there in January of 2021, we think we have successfully crafted it so that your tax property payments will be the same as adjusted for inflation, and that it should not have a big impact on JCPS.
Very well. Thank you, Senator West. Representative Tipton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate all my colleagues being here today. Ms. Smith, just a little background. I'm from Spencer County, right next to Louisville. Louisville is my news market, and I appreciate your comments about the reason a lot of the West End residents had concerns about development coming in, about how it would impact their ability to stay in their homes. That's very, very informative to me. And I do have a question regarding the tax structure. I'm a real estate broker, so I deal in this a little bit. I understand the terms that have been used, and I just want to make sure that I'm understanding how this structure is going to work. The assessed value of property would continue to rise as development comes in. We would see an increase in assessment. And let's say we just talked about Jefferson County Schools. They set their tax rate for any given year. And for this West End Opportunity area, the tax rate would be capped at 50% of what their rate is for the whole. Am I explaining that correctly or understanding that correctly, just as an example?
I'm going to defer to Senator McGarvey on that one.
Well, excuse me. What you have to keep in mind here, I would ask you to keep in mind here, if not for the intervention, valuations will not go up.
Sure.
They will go down. But with the intervention, it's on new valuations. It's on the increase, which means that the tax rate that's already existing as of January 2021 is still going to go into the mix of how taxes roll out in the first place.
Sure.
So there's no calculation I think I could sit here and make, because we don't know the rate that valuation would go up or not. And obviously this is going to be a long-term piece as it relates to that. So I think there's not a negative. If you're thinking theoretically, I would say it's a neutral proposition. But if you're thinking prospectively, in terms of where we're going. It lays the foundation for increased tax rates in the future that would not be there if not for this intervention and investment.
And thank you, Representative Tipton, on that. And forgive me for pushing us like this. There were 2 questions when testimony ended, and this list has gotten terribly long all of a sudden. Representative Wilner will ultimately have the last question, but I'll get through everybody on this list here. Senator Nemes, you're next.
Mr. Chairman, just real quickly, Representative Tipton, I'd be happy to talk a few more things about that after the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to thank all of y'all for bringing this to help a part of Kentucky that is struggling to reflourish. I think you've done it right by going there and asking what is needed instead of telling them what is needed. I'd like to hear more about the tax cap. I think Senator McGarvey explained that a little bit. They have to live there now. They can't move in and get the tax cap. And I'd like to hear about income limits if someone is making lots of money. And also I'd like to talk about renters and people in the community being able to buy homes. I think Secretary Ramsey and I talked to Senator Stivers about an opportunity for that to happen. And
Senator, we're getting about 4 things, each of which need 20
those
minutes.
are comments.
You got about 2 minutes to answer here.
My question is, why is the director of the Urban League against this bill? Thank you.
I was unaware she was against the bill. Is that the only question, or do you want me to address the other things too? Okay, I'm unaware that she's against the bill. All our conversations with her have been positive.
All right. Thank you, Senator Nemes. Senator Webb.
And I'll be brief, but in response to Representative Goforth, I'm going to rewind the historical tape a while back. Many years ago when I was in the House, actually Representative Larry Clark was working on TIF legislation for Louisville, and he asked me to participate in the drafting of that plan, the original TIF legislation, which, you know, this kid from East Kentucky was glad to do. And even though my district didn't see any realization, I think we have in incidental ways with what all happens in Louisville. We all utilize it. It's the economic engine for the state. I had no problem in doing that and promoting that original TIF legislation. And now I'm in a district where that has more of an urban center, and we actually discuss TIF legislation. So when, you know, and I did that with the goal that maybe it could be utilized at some point in other areas of the state, or the model, or a modified version. So it was not hard for me back then to make that stretch, and I think people understand that. And I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Nemes. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. The president wanted to comment. Go ahead.
Yes, and Representative Goforth, to that extent, one of the things that really brought my attention to this was my children. At the time that my kids went to U of L, my one daughter is a master's level biomedical engineer, I had 13 students from Clay County going to the University of Louisville. I joke that we don't fly out of the Garrett International Airport, but we do go out to the Louisville International Airport. So when you think about missions, Lexington and Louisville have broad-based missions well beyond the geographic confines of their boundaries. And it reaches out to all parts of the state in education, healthcare, transportation, entertainment. The Fair and Exposition Center is one of the few events that when the state fair is there, it has pre-sold tickets to all 120 counties in the state. So it services, it is not just Louisville. And I can go on for retail and legal, a lot of other things. It has a mission way beyond the geographic borders that touches every part of the state. And I can give you the last 4 instances. Redbird Clinic, edge of Harlan, Bell, Clay, and Leslie, is now doing a rotation of their dental students to provide dental services to rural eastern Kentucky, specifically for women who are pregnant with chemical dependency. That's the outreach.
Representative Nemes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I say this is an exciting bill. It's a very complex bill late in the session. It's not new ideas. You know, Jack Kemp was run on this 50 years ago, Rand Paul. He's talked about economic empowerment zones when he opened his West End office. These aren't new, but they're new edges to them. And so I think there's a lot of questions. One question I have, I want to focus on the property tax portion. I don't know how we get around 172 of the Constitution, which clearly says all property not exempted from taxation by this Constitution shall be assessed for taxation at its fair cash value. I don't think we can get around that. If we did want to get around it, how much money would this take away from JCPS over 30 years? It seems to me a whole lot more than $25 million in the last bill we talked about. So is that something we can afford? Has an analysis been done on that? And then my last thing is, if we're going to do this, and this is the same issue, Mr. Chairman, if we're going to do this because we don't want gentrification to run folks out of their home, and I think that's a laudable goal, very laudable goal, it would seem to me that we could do that in a better way. Like, for example, saying your taxes shall not go up any more than anywhere else in the county, average throughout the county. But to freeze it at 30 years, it'd be awful hard for me to look at my people that live in Linden and Berrytown and tell them their taxes are going to go up. JCPS just raised them 9.5%. Their taxes are going to go up for 30 years, but other people's aren't. So it's going to be hard for me policy-wise.
Can we get around to a question?
So is there any comments on the 172 and how this complies with 172? And have you thought of other ways than a 30-year tax freeze?
Thank you, Representative Nemus, and you know from your experience in your other jobs, ultimately there might be another body that decides whether we've done it correctly. We think we have, and the key in 172 that you just mentioned is the word assessed. We don't keep the property from being assessed at a certain value. What we're doing is keeping the payments at a certain value. And part of the way we keep the payments at a certain value is also within the bill itself, which directs the board to pay some of the overages of what the taxes are now. And so that's kind of how we get around that constitutional provision. I'll also tell you that we've got a constitutional amendment drafted should we need it. And we've, at one point it was me and Senator Neal and Senator Stivers sitting in a room with I don't know how many lawyers going over back and forth. How can we do this, right? So we admit that we've looked at these constitutional sections, but we think that word assessment is key there.
And we're sure if you had 6 lawyers, you had 7 different legal opinions, and we're very
least.
proud of that. All right,
At
Representative
least.
Raymond.
Can I make this?
Mr. President, briefly.
And we looked at a series of case law about how the classification could be distinguished to create this type of dynamic. So there is case law supporting what we have done.
I'd like copies of that case law. Thank you.
Representative Raymond.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to ask about the dollar figure, $30 million overall, $10 million from the state. As you mentioned, out of our budget, that's an awfully piddly amount. And my question is, how far will that go? And maybe this is for Ms. Smith. You know, that's about $3 million per neighborhood that we're talking about. I don't see it stretching that far. We just saw the Urban League's Track and Field Center. It was budgeted at $35 million. It costs $53 million. So is $30 million, $10 million from the state going to be enough?
I would say it would be a significant buoy to this whole initiative. And having 30 years in doing this work, I can tell you just at One West, we were set on a $10 million capital campaign, and we're already invested in over 200,000 square feet of commercial property in just 3 years' time. And so that we're talking about over 4,000 vacant and abandoned units or underperforming units in the West End. That 30 million would be significant in beginning the revitalization as well as fostering interest in investment from other folks. And I will tell you that we have seen very little, while it's a good program, we have seen very little investment in the West End from opportunity zones. So we've got to do something new and different, and that initial seed money would be instrumental in helping us begin to have impact.
Senator McGarvey, you had a...
And I just want to stress quickly, I appreciate that, Representative Raymond, and obviously I agree with you probably, but it is seed money, because what happens is the money from the TIF will not start flowing in immediately. And so what this is hopefully going to do is the $30 million is that seed money that gets things going for this board. And then when the money starts coming in from the TIF, it will perpetuate within the community.
Thank you, Representative Raymond. President has a brief comment.
All right. If you take that $30 million and you say $10 million of it goes into one of those 5,000 acres or 5,000 parcels, that parcel goes from a non-producing asset to a $10 million asset. That is new money that's going to roll back into that. And so that will continue to perpetuate that fund, and you've actually created a non-producing property that now is generating $200,000 or $300,000 a year in property tax, which was zero. 80% of that rolls back in to create more producing property taxes, which we get 20% of.
All right,
That's the theory.
Representative Wilner, you have the last question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So many questions, so little time. But I'll settle on this one. Who decided which groups to include in the West End Opportunity Partnership? And I guess specifically, why are only 5 of the 9 neighborhoods represented on the board?
Yeah. I think part of this piece was to make sure that there was institutional involvement here. If you talk about the Urban League, if you talk about the NAACP, if you talk about Simmons College, these are institutional pieces that they're value added. They are like part of the roots that are in the community, but they also have expertise associated with their long-term activity in the community, and they all have their own credibility in terms of what they do. So that's very important to have that institutional memory, that institutional involvement, and institutional leverage, quite frankly. It's also important to make sure that there are individuals with expertise, financial expertise, into this process. This is not a walk in the park. I mean, it's going to take people who know that aspect of what we're going to do there. There's 17 people, at least is proposed for this board. 5 of them out of that 17 are designated just for that particular come directly out of the community. It's possible, and it's still discussion, because I agree that 9 would be a better number out of the community representing each of those neighborhoods. I think would be fine. Additionally, I would say there's also an additional board in an advisory capacity as well. And that board comes 9 individuals, an individual representing each of those neighborhoods, and they engage in the process of not only advocacy, recommendations, but also evaluation of what the governing board does itself as well. So we think there's a lot of girth, there's a lot of input opportunities, and that's one of the things we were very concerned about. You know, you can't have so many people at the table. So how do you construct a table that's representative and can make it go far? In fact, that's what we do, right? We are representatives of that process. So the community has to be very much involved, and that's why when you get to the level of the self-perpetuating board and they select this piece, it's going to roll out because people are going to perform. Are they not going to perform? People are going to move on. People from the community will get more involved and engaged. And this is the way it always happens in community development initiatives. Those of you, and I'm sure all of you, have been close to the ground on that before.
Very well.
So, yeah.
All right. And with that, Representative Wilner, thank you. To Representative Stevenson, Representative Fleming, thank you for your efforts. Senator McGarvey, President Stivers, of course, and out of deference and respect to the Dean of the Senate, Senator Neal, if you want to give us one more minute to just wrap up here and send us off with some parting thoughts, it'd be appreciated.
Could we?
Fleming, thank you for your efforts. Senator McGarvey, President Stivers, of course, and out of deference and respect to the Dean of the Senate, Senator Neal, if you want to give us one more minute to just wrap up here and send us off with some parting thoughts, it'd be appreciated.
Could we codify that last comment? Let me say, first of all, I'm grateful for the questions that were raised, because let me tell you, there was a lot of questions to answer to. And I think there are going to be questions that will come up. There's going to be trust issues. There's going to be all kinds of things, perhaps things we haven't thought about. But one thing I do want you to leave with is that to do nothing, from my perspective, is not an option. I think to do nothing is to allow things to flounder and go the way that process is already showing indications of, and that is deterioration. This counters that. It promotes home ownership stabilization. It promotes economic development. It's something that self-perpetuates in terms of a community's input. And in addition, what it does, it foretells and portends to elevate a community that has been neglected, has been promised over and over, but not delivered. This can deliver, and the people there are part of being empowered to make the outcome one that I would call a win-win-win.
Thank you all very much. As our motto says, united we stand, divided we fall. We appreciate your time today. For those members on the Free Conference Committee on the legislative budget, we will be meeting over in 154 immediately upon adjournment of this meeting. Mr. Co-Chair, do you have any concluding comments?
None. Thank you very much.
All right, very well. We stand adjourned.